Have you ever heard of the miracle of the Han River? Well, here's a backstory. 안녕하세요 여러분, 저는 한나예요. Hello everyone, my name is Hannah. For those that are new here, 만나서 반갑습니다. So today we are going to do a little history. We are going to chip into the history of Korea to see where the phrase the miracle of the Han River actually came from. So make sure to stick around for some storytelling. It's gonna get juicy. So in 1910, Korea lost its independence to Japan due to colonialism. That is, the Japanese government ruled over everything from the military, the land, the government, the industries, education, everything was taken over by the Japanese government. And this happened for a whole 35 years, that is from 1910 to 1945. To the extent that you find Korean people were not allowed to speak their own language in their own country. It was punishable to hear anyone even call out their mom as Oma. Like if you were heard uttering a Korean word, it would be punishable. And even in school, they were forced to study in Japanese. Everything just happened in Japanese. So they took over everything, tried to erase the culture, tried to break down all the palaces. Everything that related to Korean culture was trying to be demolished during this period. Now, within this very period, Japan managed to build a few roads here and there. They constructed factories that did help a little bit with the Korean economy, at least during the time that the Japanese were there. They constructed factories that helped with the economy. However, most of the benefits went to the Japanese people. So it was the Japanese that benefited from it mostly, and you'd find it is the Korean people that are acting as labor in these industries with little or no pay during the period of colonial rule in Korea. P.S. Before we continue, during that period, Korea was actually not referred to as Korea. It was referred to as Joseon. And then the capital city, Seoul, was also referred to as Keijo instead of Seoul during that period. Now let's get back to our story. So the Japanese colonial rule did not last. After the 35 years, they had to surrender. That is 1945. They surrendered, and that means Korea became free again. They managed to earn their liberation, and the Japanese were given until September, because it was in August that they got their liberation back, August 15th. That is the day they celebrate Liberation Day in South Korea, even North Korea, in both the countries. That is the day they were liberated. So the Japanese surrendered in 1945, and they were given till September to move out of Korea completely. Now, this was not the end of everything. Immediately after 5 years, that is in 1950, another war broke out. That is the Korean War. Now, this is between North Korea and South Korea, and the two countries ended up parting, like we all know. Now, this war, the Korean War, caused a lot of damage to the economy, because remember, as the Japanese ruled Korea, at least they had tried to construct a few industries, a few factories, the roads and everything that had at least contributed something to the Korean economy. But with the Korean War, everything was demolished, everything was destroyed, and Korea was then ranked among the poorest countries in the world, because its economy was in the poorest state that you could think of. Everything was demolished. Remember, people had lost their land during the Japanese rule, so people had nothing, no assets, nothing to start with. And by then, Korea was an agrarian economy. Like, they based a lot on agriculture for most of their income. Like, it was a subsistence economy by then. Like, people would do agriculture for home use and everything. But most of these people had actually already lost their land to the Japanese government, which had not yet been given back. Yes, there were reforms to have land redistributed and everything, but not everybody had it that way. So this affected the economy a lot, because at least most of the factories that were employing people were destroyed. So they came back to zero, and Korea was ranked among the poorest economies there was at the time. It was actually ranked poorer than most African countries right now at that time. Yet right now, it is one of the best economies there is. So we want to understand, how did that happen? So, in efforts to grow the nation again, a 5-year plan was implemented aiming at developing the economy through the agriculture, modernizing agriculture, establishing more education, like for the workers, because the one thing that Korea really, really did or invested in was education. They tried to make sure that all their manpower or all the human resources were able to like have a proper education so that as development comes, they're able to go along with the development. So they really invested in education, one thing that contributed a lot to the growth of South Korea's economy, because even the least, like even manpower you'd find in the villages were at least educated to a certain extent. They were able to run the machines. They were able to do the basics as per required. And this helped a lot with developing the country. So the 5-year plan aimed at having more agricultural reforms, modernizing agriculture, ensuring that there's more development, more industries, expansion of the energy industries like coal, electric power, among others. This was implemented and it started helping out in growing the economy. And between 1963 to 1972, Korea relied solely or majorly on foreign aid, because remember the country like could not really support itself, so they needed to get foreign aid from countries like the US and so on. But their aim was at making sure they can repay back their debts and be able to support themselves in the future. So they, like I said, heavily relied on educating all human resources and investing most of their income, something that they did, and today we are able to see the results of that investment. With the foreign aid that they received from these countries, Korea went ahead to launch the Sema-Wool movement, where they aimed at developing even the rural areas rather than concentrating on the cities, which made like development come about really fast because there was income from the different sectors in the country, from the rural areas, from the centers, the urban centers. So every place was developing at a steady rate. With this, the government went ahead to continue setting more economic plans to see that they have more roads constructed, bridges. They invested in education so that the next generation would be able to support the modernization, because they're working towards growing the country. But if the next generation can't really be able to handle the technology and the development, then it would all be useless. So they looked at educating the younger generation so that tomorrow they can be able to manage the modernization that is brought up by the development. So Korea went ahead to shift from just being a country that grew rice to a modernized country, to a tech hub like we see now, because we all know that it is home to the largest tech companies, Hyundai, Samsung, LG, name it. From a rice growing country, they became a country that was building phones, laptops, ships, exporting electronics. Korea started growing because they recognized what they needed most: education to support modernization, and they decided to invest in technology rather than solely relying on agriculture. So by the 1990s, this economic transformation was actually referred to as the miracle of the Han River, something that was not originally from South Korea. They adopted it from a similar phrase about the economic transformation of West Germany after the war. So this is where it was adopted from, because it was just a similar situation. Now, why Han River? Han River is actually the Hangang River in South Korea, but the word gang in South Korea actually means river. So to avoid sounding like you're repeating the same thing by saying Hangang River, it's cut short for Han River, since it would sound like you're saying Han River. So this is like a major river in South Korea that has attracted tourists. It is just like the River Nile is to Uganda. So it was the best thing that they could refer to describe what happened. The miracle of the Han River. Like they had been able to see development after a war, rapid development on the banks of the Han River. Things like the Namsan Tower, random huge industries, companies that have grown. It's all considered that it all happened on the banks of the Han River. The construction of companies like Samsung, Hyundai, LG, all those universities that everyone wants to go to, all the companies that people want to go to, the K-pop industry, the entertainment industry, like everything happened on the banks of the Han River. And it's considered a miracle considering the state Korea was in the late 50s and 60s and all that colonial period. Like, it came from a war-torn nation to one of the most admired economies in the world today. Hence, the miracle of the Han River.